I'm meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Monday morning, December 20th. A cold morning here in the Mid-Atlantic region, here in the southeastern part of Pennsylvania. Some of the lowest readings so far this season, with low temperatures in the low to mid-20s in many areas. And much of the northeastern part of the nation actually is experiencing some of the coldest temperatures so far this season this morning. Of course, there was quite a decent snowfall upstate New York, interior New England, later yesterday into last night, and that is contributing to some of the low temperature readings of this morning. It looks like a seasonably chilly next few days, relatively quiet in the northeast part of the nation. And we'll take a look at many teleconnection indices, a quick look at the stratospheric warming event that is underway right now. And then we'll take a look at some of the model forecasts, this time taking a look at the Canadian model forecast from last night. First of all, the MJO, we've talked about this tropical teleconnection index heading into what is typically colder phases for much of the U.S. this time of the year. Indeed, that is still the pattern here. This is the European model forecast in red for the MJO over the next couple of weeks. And what we see here is kind of a strange path here, but it set up right in this region right here as we begin the day on the 19th, which was actually yesterday, but as we begin the forecast time period right here. Then in red, it actually goes up in this fashion, kind of takes a loop around and goes over this direction. This is the end of the forecast period, January 3rd, as seen right up here. So it has just entered what we call phase 7. The phases are shown on this kind of a map right in this region right here. This is phase 8. And these two phases right in here are typically cold for much of the central and eastern part of the nation. So again, we've just now entered into phase 7. And again, this morning, some of the lowest temperatures of the season so far in parts of the Mid-Atlantic, Northeast. The Pacific Northwest seems to be really headed for some colder than normal weather over the immediate term, and there are certainly continuing signs that that will slowly spread to the south and east across the nation over the next several days, probably not really locking in into the northeast until after Christmas, somewhere between the Christmas and New Year's holiday period. Well, with the MJO, a tropical teleconnection index, seemingly headed into colder phases for much of the nation's phases 7 and 8 over the next couple of weeks. How about the Arctic teleconnection indices? Let's take a look at those. AO, Arctic Oscillation, NAO, North Atlantic Oscillation, kind of closely related cousins. When they fall into negative territory for a sustained period of time, that tends to lead the weather pattern, or it tends to signal that the weather pattern will be ripe for some high latitude blocking, with higher heights than normal, higher temperatures and pressures than normal up across places like Greenland, Iceland, northeastern Canada, and that in turn typically allows for cold air outbreaks to make it from way up in Canada into the central and eastern U.S. Well, the forecast in red here is largely in negative territory for the AO over the next couple of weeks. This is the neutral line right here, and black represents the actual observations, and again, red in forecast. This is from the GFS ensemble run, again, in negative territory over the next couple of weeks as we head right into the beginning of the new year. Now, as far as the NAO is concerned, right now in negative territory, and it kind of takes a little jog up to neutral and then tends to form more of a negative pattern here as we go through the end of December into the very beginning part of the new year. So again, I would say the Arctic Oscillation, the NAO, are somewhat supportive of what we're seeing with the MJO, kind of a tendency to go into colder and colder weather patterns for much of the nation. Well, one other event we'll monitor over the next several days, there is signs of a stratospheric warming event. In fact, this is the forecast map for tonight from the GFS model run, and what we're looking at is a top-down view with the North Pole right in the center of this particular kind of a temperature map at 10 millibars. This is way up at the top of the atmosphere in what we call the stratosphere. Normally there's a polar vortex, as is shown right here, sitting near or over the North Pole. The U.S. is down in this region right here. And this represents warmer air relative to normal. Again, this is relative to normal. This is certainly by no means actually warm air. It's way below zero as seen on this particular scale, but it's warmer than what we see associated with the polar vortex, and we'll see how that evolves over the next several days. Just the displacement of this polar vortex on the one side of the pole can kind of unleash some cold air masses from the high latitudes down to the middle latitudes over the next several weeks, and this is something we'll monitor in the near term. Well, let's take a look at last night's ensemble run of the Canadian model in terms of the 5-day averages of 500 millibar height anomalies going forward into the end of the month and into the new year. First of all, an area of way above normal heights right now over Greenland, and again, that's kind of supported by the idea that the NAO and Arctic Oscillation are both in or will be in negative territory over the next several days. Just a tremendous ridge out here over the Aleutian Islands. Now let's move forward. Again, this is an average in a 5-day period. This is the current 5-day period. Let's move forward and watch what happens here. And some of the things I want to look for over the next several days. First of all, once we get out a little bit past the end of this week into the weekend, this is actually running from December 24th, which is Friday, all the way to December 29th, now days 5 to 9. Notice, still blocking over Greenland, northern Canada, and a couple different areas of upper level trough. Here situated over the northwestern part of the Atlantic, and another area over the western part of Canada, the western part of the U.S. And again, I mentioned up front, this part of the nation, the Pacific Northwest, Southwest part of Canada, will experience a real cold blast, several degrees below normal, maybe 20, 30 degrees below normal air coming into this part of North America over the next several days. And what we'll be looking for in the next week to 2 weeks is kind of a connection between these two upper level low pressure areas, one over the Atlantic, one over the western part of the U.S. and Canada. Let's move forward here and watch the Canadian model as we get closer and closer to the end of the month and into the early part of January. This is all the way out now to the New Year's Eve, all the way to January 5th. And notice we have still some blocking here over northern Canada and Greenland, and kind of a connection starting to show up here on the maps. Again, this is an average for a 5-day period at the end of the month. This is a pretty cold look to the overall pattern right here. Once we get this kind of connection here between these two upper level low pressure areas, that will likely be quite an active, quite a cold stretch of weather starting to show up here later in the month of December into early January across the northern part of the nation. Still a blocking pattern showing up here as well, an important player to monitor over the next several days. Notice the ridging that was up over the central part of the U.S. has kind of weakened and retrograded all the way to the south and west by this particular time period. Now let's take a look at the temperature pattern. These are averages over 5-day periods of the 850 millibar temperature anomalies. The current 5-day period, notice all this very cold air here sitting across western Canada. With the block already setting up over Greenland, you have higher temperatures than normal up in that part of North America. Now let's move forward here. Look at this over the next few days. This is extremely cold air for this time of the year. When you get purple showing up like this, which is perhaps as much as 20 degrees below normal at the latter part of December, that's some awfully cold air moving into the southwestern part of Canada, all the way from California to the Pacific Northwest. Still warmer than normal conditions across the heartland of the U.S. And again, we're kind of showing up here in the temperature anomaly maps these upper level lows, one over the Atlantic and one over the western part of Canada, the western part of the U.S. And again, when these kind of link up, that's when the whole northern part of the nation will tend to be colder than normal and quite an active period here, I think, setting up here with that block remaining over northern Canada and kind of a connection between these two upper level low pressure areas. This is colder than normal conditions extending by this time from the west coast all the way into the mid-Atlantic region. Well, let's wrap up by looking at the surface forecast maps from last night's 0Z run of the Canadian model. A quiet few days here in the mid-Atlantic, in the northeast U.S., but then later in the week, Friday, Saturday, Sunday time frame, there will be a few different low pressure areas that we'll have to monitor. But again, cold conditions this morning, snow cover now all the way from upstate New York across much of interior New England, adding to the cold this morning here, and then we move forward here. Seasonably chilly over the next few days, and this low pressure area is still something to monitor as we get closer and closer to this event time here, where this moves up to the north and east to the Carolinas. It looks like it stays just to the south and east of the I-95 corridor region, but the Canadian model has a little bit of a band of precipitation on Wednesday morning. It's something we still have to watch since it's such a close call here. Any kind of a shift to the north and west could change your forecast for Wednesday, but it's something we'll monitor over the next 48 hours or so. That passes on by. A colder air mass comes in on its heels by the time we get to Wednesday night and Thursday. Then it turns milder again by Christmas Day. But before we get there, by around Christmas Eve, we do have a wave of low pressure that will be moving into the northeastern part of the country. Something we'll have to monitor. The GFS a little bit more bullish on this system here with a little bit more precip farther to the south. Something we'll have to monitor. Then the chances are it gets a little bit milder by the time we get into Christmas Eve and then Christmas Day, but another system will be pressing to the east. So kind of an active time period, it looks like. At least something we'll have to monitor in terms of several low pressure areas. Friday, Saturday, Sunday time frame. This actually puts out some snowfall upstate Pennsylvania, New York State by the time we get into late Christmas Eve into Christmas Day. Low pressure forms off the mid-Atlantic coastline at this time, and from, let's say, the Pennsylvania-Maryland border on south could end up being quite a mild day on Christmas with high temperatures of 50 or more degrees, but accumulating snow possible on the other side of the frontal system up across New England and maybe upstate New York as well. And then another wave of low pressure kind of follows that by the time we get to the early part of the weekend, and some more cold air moves in. Real cold air by this time has pushed into the northwestern part of the nation. So a lot going on here. Teleconnection indices continue to point to generally a colder and colder pattern as we head towards the latter part of the month of December for the northern U.S. into the early part of January. So relatively quiet next couple of days, more active weather midweek, late week into the weekend across the northeastern part of the nation. That's it for now. I'm meteorologist